The year is 1964. You're a member of the Canadian Armed Forces. The world is in the grip of Cold War paranoia, but that's the last thing on your mind, because you're being led to a room. Your handlers tell you you'll be the subject of a psychological experiment, but you could tell there's more to it than that. When you get to the room, there's a chair, like a dentist's chair. In front of the chair is a box, a fluorescent screen, and a projector. You're asked to sit. Once you do, images flash in front of you. Paintings, religious iconography. And then, as if from nowhere, pictures of naked and near-naked women. Pictures of men taken from the pages of bodybuilding magazines. And all the while, as you sit staring, cameras point directly at your eyes, recording every blink, every twitch, all with millimeter precision, trying to determine your sexual preferences and catch you in a lie. You're inside the Canadian government's attempt to build a device capable of detecting homosexuality, a real-world attempt to build a functioning Gaydar. You are a subject of the fruit machine.
Will there be peace or war?
It's sex and such things, part of the spying game.
Yes, definitely.
Throughout the world, throngs of people hail the end of the war in Europe.
It's often said that the Cold War began the moment that World War II ended, but the truth is more complicated. In many ways, the all-consuming paranoia commonly associated with the Cold War began in Canada.
Master, you are Mr. Igor Gouzenko?
That's right.
And you are the man who exposed part of the Canadian espionage system in 1945.
That's correct.
September 1945, Ottawa, the Canadian capital, home to Parliament and the highest level government buildings in the country. Less than a month after the surrender of Imperial Japan, a code clerk working out of the Soviet embassy named Igor Gouzenko defects, smuggling 109 documents out of that embassy. He brings them to the offices of the Ottawa Journal. The information on the documents is so shocking, it takes him 3 days to convince anyone of the story he's trying to tell. Those documents show a network of communist spies, all working in concert to divulge the most sensitive secrets of the Canadian government, including chemical weapons, projectile weapons, and even atomic research. The documents reveal the depth of the infiltration. They tell of a Russian agent at the Department of External Affairs who knows all of Canada's ciphers because he's seen them with his own eyes. They cite an electrical engineer with Canada's National Research Council who's given the Soviets material on radar systems. A physicist with the NRC has supplied the Soviets with a small sample of enriched uranium. In all, 20 arrests were made, of which 10 were convicted as Soviet spies. The convictions include a worker at a government agency and even a member of parliament. The Gouzenko affair sent shockwaves through the world and crystallized the Cold War, pitting the Western world against the Soviet Union for the next 45 years. In Canada, these inflammatory revelations stoked a creeping paranoia that would come to be a hallmark of the Cold War. The names on Gouzenko's documents weren't seasoned spies or hardened professionals. They were everyday Canadians who happened to sympathize with the communist cause, which meant anyone, anywhere in the country could be a sympathizer. With that, Canada's Red Scare began in earnest. The Canadian government immediately starts internal investigations. They create an intergovernmental agency called the Security Panel to seek out civil servants, RCMP, and other government workers who would potentially be disloyal to the Canadian government. Because many of the convicted had affiliations to Canada's Communist Party, the Security Panel's first focus is rooting out any government members with subversive political associations. But according to internal documents from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police at the time, they were victims of their own success. In 1950, the Canadian government believed that there were no more Communist Party of Canada associates left for the Soviet Union to recruit, so they turned their attention. They focused on agents that could be coerced by discovering and exploiting character weaknesses of persons in government employ, including homosexuality. The government was supposedly concerned that homosexual government workers could be easily blackmailed, but it's easy to imagine that the government shared the same views on gay men and lesbians that the average Canadian might have felt at the time.
I think they should be locked up.
You think that they should be put away? Do you think that they're a danger, a menace?
Yes, definitely.
And what do you suggest we could do about them other than locking them up?
Well, you could give them homes like they do for the mentally insane.
It was an environment of overt hostility towards the gay community, a belief in homosexuality as a moral failing. So it should come as no surprise that when the security panel changed their focus from removing government employees with character weaknesses, their next target became the queer community. And so the Red Scare was buttressed by a so-called Lavender Scare. Hundreds of queer government employees lost their jobs or were demoted. The RCMP collected the names of thousands of possible homosexuals, but they weren't finished. They wanted to tear out the character weakness of homosexuality, root and stem. Their search centered on Ottawa. A unit called Section A3 was tasked with hunting down homosexuals in the federal government. Plainclothes Mounties would spy on known gay hangouts like the Lord Elgin Hotel and the Rialto Theatre. They ran constant surveillance, compiling hundreds of photographs of suspected homosexuals. When they weren't able to identify someone in those photos, they took extreme measures. In one case, they approached a local drag queen known as Paul Peaches Latour Fournier. He was openly gay, performing for a queer audience who preferred to remain hidden. Understandably so, people were losing their jobs and livelihoods for the crime of being gay. But Peaches Latour refused to name names. This wasn't enough for the Canadian government. They wanted a faster, cleaner way of determining the sexual orientation of their civil servants. On August 2nd, 1961, a meeting was held in the Privy Council Committee Room. Among others, it was attended by Robert Bryce, Clerk of the Privy Council, Clifford Harvison, Commissioner of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, Norman Robertson, career politician and one-time right-hand man for Prime Minister Mackenzie King, and Professor Frank Robert Wake, first chair at Carleton University's Psychology Department. Notably, Dr. Wake had been a researcher for the Royal Commission on the criminal law relating to criminal sexual psychopaths. The minutes of that meeting were titled, Meeting Regarding Dr. Wake's Special Project. From this meeting, Professor Wake was provided funding to go to the United States to research and study detection tests and technologies regarding homosexuality. From there, his research project was funded by National Health and Welfare. The Canadian government had empowered Professor Wake to determine the sexual orientation of its own government workforce through objective, scientific means. Now, it was up to him to figure out how. Homosexuality detection was a burgeoning field at the time. The United States already had their own device, which they believed to be a mechanical homosexuality detector, the E-meter. The E-meter was a portable device capable of determining any changes in the conductivity of one's skin. The American government believed that would help ascertain the subject's sexual orientation. E-meters are still used today by the Church of Scientology to examine the mental state of its members. The results derived are far from clinically rigorous. In his bid to find his own method for rooting out sexual orientation, Dr. Wake performed medical examinations and psychiatric interviews. But soon, the doctor was honing in on tests that measured psychological changes brought about by changes in emotional state. Polygraphs, plethysmographs, which measured blood volume in the finger. But these tests were finicky, unreliable. Wake showed interest in another method known as the Palmer sweat test. He thought it could be coupled with word association tests to see how the subject reacted to words aligned with homosexuality. The list included words the clinicians thought of as stereotypically homosexual: queen, circus, top men, among other words that ranged from laughable to outright bigoted. Dr. Wake then began to focus on a promising new field, pupillometry. This was the measurement of changes in pupil size as they reacted to stimuli. The science went that the pupil would increase in size when looking at something the subject found enjoyable. Two recent experiments in pupillometry were of particular interest to Dr. Wake. The first was by a grad student named Alan Seltzer. The subject of the study would be shown a range of stimuli: paintings, Christ on the cross, and pictures from fitness magazines devoted to the male physique. In some instances, the pictures were described as near pornographic. It was exactly what Wake had been looking for. According to the findings of the study, the changes in size of pupil was indicative of sexual preference. The researchers also took note of where exactly on the picture the pupils would focus, including one subject, deemed homosexual, who was unable to pry his eyes from the genital area of Christ on the cross. Dr. Wake took great interest in the confession of another of the subjects in this study, who said he had tried his best to beat the machine, but knew he had failed. The other pupillometric experiment Wake was drawn to was conducted in America. A professor took subjects to the supermarket and attached a device to their heads with a camera mounted on a pointer. The camera would take pictures of the subject's eyes as they would walk from display to display, their pupils involuntarily reacting to every type of packaging they see. Wake and the rest of the Privy Council team were thrilled. Finally, it was time for Wake to get his own machine up and running. the device that became known as the fruit machine, an unofficial slang nickname referring both to casino slot machines and a bigoted nickname for homosexuals. Unlike the small, unobtrusive American e-meter, Canada's fruit machine was large, involved, cumbersome. No official photographs or blueprints exist of the contraption. This is a recreation based on declassified documents and first-hand testimony. The subject would sit in a chair. A camera would be hung from the ceiling, suspended by pulleys, aiming a camera directly at his pupils. One of the participants in the study highlighted what a bizarre, otherworldly experience it was. It looked like something out of science fiction. It didn't look as if it had been built on Earth. There was a whole bunch of girders that were small flanges to bolt equipment together, and a screen in a box containing naughty pictures. All the while, a black box with a screen and projector would play images. And just like Seltzer's study, they contained everyday pictures mixed with sexually provocative pictures of men and women. The fruit machine was born. From the moment the fruit machine was birthed, it simultaneously began its slow, inexorable death. Its failures were manifest to everyone but its creators. On a purely technical level, the fruit machine simply did not work. The contraption wasn't able to properly account for different heights, different sized pupils, variations in distances between the eyes. The authors of the fruit machine ran up against more technological difficulties. The camera could not be placed in the optimal position for studying the pupil, because if it was placed directly in front of the subject, they wouldn't be able to see the picture. So the camera was placed at an angle, which made measurement of the pupils more difficult. State-of-the-art camera technology was needed, which had to be secured from the Air Force at great delay and expense. From there, each picture of the pupil had to be developed and magnified, picture by painstaking picture. The process was labor-intensive, to say the least. The difficulty was exacerbated by the cold, simple fact that it was impossible to get subjects. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police started by trying to recruit its own members, but no one would agree to it. There was no good outcome to taking the test. Potential subjects knew they could be labeled with a dreaded false positive. As one security service officer joked, "I wouldn't go anywhere near it in case they put the electrodes on me and the machine blew a fuse." Then, of course, was the possibility of being exposed as a homosexual and being labeled as having a character deficiency. According to rumor, one homosexual informer for the security services took the test on a volunteer basis. When he did test positive, he was instantly ostracized. The machine operator shouted, "Don't let him get away." The informer was incredulous and shouted, "I volunteered for this." Whether or not the story was true, it spread through the service, diminishing even further the amount of volunteers for the study. One member said that everyone believed that a light on the machine would start flashing, as if blaring the accusation, "Fruit, fruit, fruit." But above all, the fruit machine was always doomed to failure, for the most obvious reason: a complete and utter misunderstanding of homosexuality. The machine operated on the biased belief that any and all homosexuals would react the same way to the same set of stimuli. Plus, there was the basic assumption inherent to the project that there were only two possible sexual orientations, homosexual and heterosexual. A test subject with any other proclivities would have completely undermined expected results. Despite all of its problems, the fruit machine program lasted for years, with absolutely nothing to show for it. When the end finally came, it was for two fundamentally connected reasons. First came a new technical problem. The experimenters determined that pupil size was greatly affected by the brightness of the pictures. The change in contrast from picture to picture undermined the results and made the content of the pictures irrelevant. To overcome this newly discovered practical issue, the study needed more data, which meant more test runs, which meant more money. But the request for further funding came at the same time as a government economy drive. The Defense Research Board was never a major supporter of the Fruit Machine project to begin with. It was an easy budget cut. The Fruit Machine was no more. The device, Dr. Wake, and the rest of its sponsors were content to let the entire affair fall into obscurity.
They'd rather not have that part of it. It's the dark corner of their history. Nobody wants to take ownership of it now,
But unfortunately, the Fruit Machine was far from the beginning or the end of the Canadian government's mistreatment of queer citizens under its employ. Between the 1950s and 1990s, countless Canadians were fired and demoted in an attempt to root out homosexuality. And in some cases, the damage done was far more severe.
They brought me to a shack that I still today don't know where it was.
I'm 19 years old. And I'm being asked questions about who takes the garbage out in the relationship.
What do you do when you meet up with your friends? Do you kiss?
Stay right now! Stay right now! Stay right
For years, these purges stayed out of the public eye, until in 1989 when Officer Michelle Douglas was discharged for being a lesbian. She launched a lawsuit which settled for $100,000. From there, the Canadian government officially ended discrimination against gay and lesbian employees. Fast forward to 2017, when Canada offered $85 million to victims of the anti-gay purges of that time, along with an apology from then Prime Minister Justin Trudeau.
We were wrong. We apologize. I am sorry. We are sorry.
It's easy to say that the arc of history is long and that it bends towards justice, but there are gaps, times where the arc bends back. So in order to make sure these events aren't permitted to hide away again, it's important to remember times like these. It's important to remember the fruit machine. Primary sources were essential to bringing you the story of the fruit machine and the carnage it wrought. To learn more, please read Men in the Shadows, the RCMP Security Service by John Sawatsky, and The Canadian War on Queers by Patrizia Gentile and Gary Kinsman. The documentary The Fruit Machine, directed by Sarah Foti, also beautifully chronicles the hidden human toll of that era. Every part of this video was animated, written, produced, and voiced over by real people. All humans, no AI.